Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. I see a bunch of names and not a lot of faces, but it's good to
Hi,
see
Ellie.
you. Oh, hi, Ellie. Hi, Lois. Welcome back.
Oh,
Hi,
thank you.
Kathy. Oh, hi,
Hi,
Joel.
David. Hey,
Hi, Sharon.
Sharon too.
Hi, Joanne.
Hi, David.
Hi, Linda. I see your name, but I don't see your face. And I see Cindy. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good.
People getting back in the world more?
Oh,
Yep.
A bit, yeah.
Getting vaccinated.
You have been?
Twice,
have?
yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. we've
How'd
done
you
twice.
react? We were just talking about that.
I've been fine. This second one was I was a little tired after the second one, and I had Pfizer, and otherwise no problem.
I was a little sick after I had Moderna, and I was a little sick after that one.
really?
After the second one. Joanne, have you had yours?
Yeah, both. Yeah, I had the Moderna, but actually I had less reaction after the second one than the first one, because the first one I had a headache for a few days, but the second one I just had a sore arm, so it was okay. So and Jay, Aviva, David, they didn't have any reaction, so we're all vaccinated.
We're getting there. Our youngest Izzy is coming back from Germany tomorrow, and Europe. They're so they were better than us during the shutdown, but they've been really slow on the vaccine. So she moved her trip up to be here to get vaccinated here.
Oh, yeah, that was my girlfriend in Norway said that they're only vaccinating 300 people a week in the whole country.
Yeah.
And in Canada, they're not vaccinating anybody, you know.
I know we have people, friends with parents in Canada, and it's been rough. Yeah,
but in England, because my brother's in London, like everybody's getting vaccinated, so they're opening up this week again, like 100%. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Germany's been very shut down for months and months. It's been tough.
Yeah, so I'm excited to come tomorrow.
Oh, I know. We missed you last week.
Yeah, well, we were away for Jay's birthday. So,
right.
Yeah, that was the first time we went away, but yeah, it was good.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so.
Let's give it just a couple more minutes. We had a lot more people signed up, and I'm not sure whether they're going to be coming or not, but let's just give it about 2 more minutes, if you guys don't mind.
Mm-hmm. How's your search for a new property?
It's going. I'm looking at a place tomorrow. Yeah, for those who don't know, Big Sunday, the office that we're in has been sold and is going to be either totally torn down or completely renovated. And whatever the plans are, it does not include us. So unfortunately, and I would love to tell you that the new landlord's a horrible jerk and is kicking us out. He's actually a very, very nice guy. And but he's a developer, so we got to move.
Anyway. He's got that whole area from you all the way to the corner to the street.
Yeah, that building behind us, Netflix is moving in there, and he owns that as well. And I think he wants to build one big campus with everything.
Oh.
And we've known about this for years, and then we kind of lost a year with COVID because with everything going on, we weren't sure exactly what to expect. So yeah, so now we're on it. Anyway, I think we should jump in because I'm not sure if we're going to expect others. We had many more people signed up, but I don't know if there's a little bit of Zoom fatigue or what it is, but it's very nice to see all of you guys. And we were going to do breakout rooms later to talk, but Aziza, you let me know what you think, but I think we might be able to, we have our own breakout room here, which is nice because I was going to have to not be in the breakout room. Welcome all you guys to the seventh and last of our series of the 7 deadly sins, called 7D. Can't live with them, can't live without them. The 7 deadly sins in today's world. And I know some of you have been here for many of them, and which was great. And I hope you've enjoyed them. And as you have seen, we've had a wide variety of ones, depending on what the subject was, what the timing was. As you remember, the early ones were quite political, and we've heard from different people with different backgrounds, nonprofit leaders, faith leaders, professors, and others. So thanks for joining us. I know you, I've seen or know all of you guys, and just a quick plug about Big Sunday. As you know, we connect people through helping. This month is Wild and Woolly April. Hi, Mary, nice to see you. It's Wild and Woolly April, where we're doing some animal projects all month, because the feeling was, after a year of worrying about everything from a global pandemic to a huge economic turndown to huge questions of racial inequality, it seemed nice to spend a month focusing on cats and dogs and other animals. Not that cats and dogs aren't important, but they're not quite as important. But tonight I want to introduce Aziza Hasan, and I'm gonna read Aziza's bio for you. So I'm a little off the screen now, but I'm so glad she is doing this. Aziza and I have known each other for years, and in fact, and I don't know if you remember this, we marched together in 2016, during the Women's March. And Ellie, my wife, was involved with NewGround, and we were downtown with about a zillion other shell-shocked people walking. So Aziza is the Executive Director of NewGround, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change, which is a national model for building authentic relationships, productive engagement, and social change between American Muslims and Jews. Named one of 50 people quietly changing the nonprofit world by the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Aziza currently serves on Eric Garcetti's Interfaith Collective and in the LA City Civil and Human Rights Commission. Aziza previously served on President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. With over 15 years as an experienced mediator and conflict transformation practitioner, Aziza's work has been featured on OZ, Yahoo News, the public radio program Speaking of Faith with Krista Tippett, the U.S. Institute of Peace, Arabic radio and television, and the Los Angeles Times. Early in her career, 2 years of AmeriCorps service gave Aziza hands-on experience in community organizing and group problem solving, and she was awarded the President's Volunteer Service Award in 2006 under President George W. Bush. In 2017, Aziza was recognized by the Executive Service Corps of Southern California, a great group, with a Megan G. Cooper Leadership Award. And I just want to say as an aside, many of these things that Aziza has been involved with and honored by, we're involved with too, and they're always honoring her, but not me. So just so you know, you're in better company than you usually are with me. We're honored very much. I was so happy when Aziza agreed to do this. So thank you very much for being here, and welcome everybody to our discussion on greed.
I'm grateful to be here, to be embraced and welcomed in such a warm way. Thank you, David. And especially to rethink and contemplate. Right now, it's actually the month of Ramadan. So it's all month of contemplation and really digging deep into tough topics. And I feel like greed is one of them. But I want to warn you from the get-go, like I'm going to have cotton mouth until about 7:22, and then I'll be drinking water, and hopefully you won't have to put up with it. But I'm especially grateful that to be here, because so NewGrounds is about bringing Muslims and Jews together, because we have a lot of good work that we need to be doing together in this world. There's lots of work out there. And actually one of our first projects 15 years ago was like, people have to go through our fellowship. These are professionals at the time. We have other programs now, but we went through our project, and then like our culminating project for the program of 9 months was actually Big Sunday. We helped install partially install a community garden. It was already in process. And I remember walking around outside and some people were mulching, some people were doing other things. And I just remember kind of feeling like, whoa, like this isn't a skill set that I have. And then I just remember being surrounded by people who were just really working hard and in a state of awe of their willingness to just kind of chime in. I think it might have even been Ramadan at the time, and people were fasting. And like, here we were just doing really important work. But fast forward, those skills of building the garden beds, etc., helped me in building my own garden in my backyard maybe 5 years ago. And when I did, I remember cultivating and like, I was like, oh, this isn't that hard. Like, I'm setting this up. And like, I had some skills that were really important. And eventually, like, I grew this, I grew with the help of so much and blessings, all this beautiful produce in the backyard. And that was a lot of skill that I had learned with Big Sunday. But something interesting happened. Like, I was really proud of myself. And I was like, well, what should we do? Like, we've got all this extra produce of tomato, etc. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to be smart about this. I'm going to chop up all the tomatoes and freeze them and like be conscious and not waste and all this other stuff, right? And so I chopped up tomatoes, like we were canning, we were doing all this stuff. And then this is like last year, so COVID hit and the refrigerator broke. And all that tomato and all those like that produce that I had frozen, just like I couldn't give it away fast enough to my neighbors. Like it was actually almost impossible just with everything that was happening. And I remember thinking in that moment, that's interesting. Like I made the choice to put it in the freezer and to some degree keep and hold on to this. And yet I actually get so much more joy when I give things away and when I am giving things away to neighbors. And so it was kind of a moment of like, was I actually saving and conserving, or was I letting part of my greed take over? And so that's why I'm really grateful to be able to sit with you and greed tonight, because I think it's something that yes, is one of the seven Ds, right? And there's so much that lead into greed, and so much that greed leads into that I'd like to explore with you this evening. And to kind of start off, I really want to make sure that I'm recognizing that I'm speaking to you from Tongva land. And so if you live in Los Angeles, you like the Tongva people were here way before the Spanish got here. And there's well-documented evidence and all sorts of stories that have come out like about the enslavement of the Tongva, and that the missions that were built here, even though they were built in, you could say, the wanting to spread God's word and all these other things, like were built on the backs of the Tongva, and who were enslaved, and who and their lands were gobbled up. They were gobbled up with greed. And I think it's part of a reflection on greed is naming the role that we maybe perpetuate and we allow to continue when we don't actually speak the stories of the wrongs of greed, that maybe they're not even the sins of ourselves, maybe they were sins of people before us, but that we don't necessarily give credence to the important things. So that's to start there, like really recognizing that this is a place and where there was fruit, there was land, and there was bounty, and greed helped gobble it up. So if we look at the actual definition of greed, a lot of definitions focus on culpability, and that things that are greed is in the same class of desire, like lust and gluttony. And so I would even argue that if you have, like lust and you want more lust, that actually lends itself to greed. You're starting to lean more into that. So I would even consider greed a greater one of those sins. And let's see, Thomas Aquinas wrote that greed is a sin against God, just as all mortal sins, in as much as man condemns things eternal for the sake of temporal things. And so a lot of times greed comes down to material things, but there's a lot more to it. And And as we're kind of on this journey together, when I was looking up different definitions of greed, it was striking to me that a lot of the definitions say that greed basically pries on us in a way that you can never fill yourself enough. Your stomach will never ever be full enough. You're never going to have enough gold or whatever it is that you want. The selfishness, the anger, the jealousy, all this unhealthy competition, like you're just never going to have enough of it. And it's actually going to speed up to your death. And it's interesting because like I saw articles from people of lots of different faith backgrounds and no faith and people without faith talk about the speeding up of essentially our walk towards death, because it's almost like a numbing, like we can't actually control it. Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, who's a philosopher and poet, writes, "Greed makes man blind and foolish. It makes him an easy prey for death." Essentially that our ability to make decisions is completely hampered by greed. So we can't necessarily make clear decisions either. And that and then when asked, what is a poison, Rumi responds that it's whatever anything that which is more than our necessity is poison. That could be power, it could be wealth, hunger, greed, laziness, ambition, hate, really anything that we allow to consume us. Dante's fourth circle of hell, I know you've already covered Dante already, but the fourth circle of hell is greed. And basically that circle is divided into two groups, the people who are hoarding and the people who are spending, and they're all jousting. And Dante actually says that a lot of members of the clergy, including cardinals and popes, belong in that specific circle. And so that begs the question to me is that, sometimes as people of good intention, maybe you're a person of one particular faith, maybe not, anybody with any moral leanings you can still fall prey and can still be trapped by I would say greed, and that it's a struggle that is a hard one, and it's an important one to be mindful and aware of. So in terms of Sodom and Gomorrah, that they were destroyed by collective greed, where only the wealthy were let in and the poor were killed. And business ethicist Mar Tamari said that who he called the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah the sin of economic egoism. And so I want to especially highlight egoism and economic because I think we're gonna definitely come back to this. In terms of greed in the Bible, in the book of Luke, it says, "Then he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And in Corinthians, it says that nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. So greediness is on the same level with slander and swindler. And you're essentially not going to be making your way into the heavens. And then more so that's like essentially like greed is just never enough. It's something that's going to speed up our path towards just death. And that greed is so Ali ibn Ali Abu Talib, who was the cousin of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he says that greed is a permanent form of slavery because it's something that it goes way beyond your ability to control if you let it. And a Persian philosopher with really prominent influences, Imam Ghazali, who lived at the early 1100s, he says that there's 3 habits that destroy a person: greed, envy, and pride. And so as you think about all these things like greed, envy, and pride, like, and the way they can live in our lives, I'm sure we could come up with lots of examples, but a lot of folks have argued that the 2008 recession was a product of greed or the result of greed. Companies, you can name several, like Enron, for example. Like there's all sorts of ways that greed lives in our lives, and we're either can be bystanders and we can actually contribute towards it. And so that's which brings me to my next point, is that greed it's not always bad. Greed can actually drive competition. And especially right now with COVID, like there's a lot of discussions about economic growth, right? And it's more than just economic growth. It's people needing jobs, people needing to be able to support their families, being worried about foreclosures and all these things. And so it kind of intertwines in itself, where some people have, some people don't, and where greed is actually a really important way that we're going to hopefully jumpstart our economy. And there's also concern about exploitation. And so that's why it's so important to really kind of be in a state of mindfulness, especially when we're digging into this. So the Quran in verse 64:15 says that your wealth and your children are only a test. Your wealth and your children. And I have to say, like, my children are incredible human beings, and they have taught me more about myself than anybody else. The challenges of being a parent, and sometimes the things that I buried years ago, I'm like, where did this come from? All of a sudden, I'm like in this feels like a wrestling match with my children because they won't do something that I'm asking them to do. And I have this flashback to the past. And so it's like, I feel like it's absolutely true that children can be a real window into my own growth. And hopefully I'll get to where they need to be, like have the mother that they deserve. And like, it's really hard work. And wealth is also one of those things that demands hard work, because sometimes we have an abundance of wealth with maybe it's finances, but maybe it's wealth in another way. And it's how we handle it that counts. And so I think that's the part that I really want to start leaning into, is like, you know, you might have heard the phrase, what hurts you blesses you. Darkness is your candle. There's this really beautiful story from a Cherokee elder who explains to his grandson that every person has a war inside of their hearts between two wolves. The first wolf is evil and creates conflict by inspiring greed, envy, lust, arrogance, pride, hatred, and fear through an overemphasis on the ego. And the second wolf is good, fostering peace and unity through a state of God consciousness. And the wide-eyed grandson replies, "Who will win this battle, grandfather?" And the wise elder replies, "The one that you feed." And so the question for us becomes, which one will we feed? Which one will we learn from? And which one will help guide us? And so I'm going to ask you to just take a moment to reflect on where greed lives in your life. Maybe either where you're maybe like me in my garden. I'm so proud of it. And I'm like doing all this work, and I'm calling myself a person who's living consciously and mindfully. And in the end, like I had to throw away all those tomatoes. Maybe it's time. I think of time and how COVID has totally messed with time for me, where I'm a mother and I have an organization that I love and I want to thrive in a time of COVID-19. And all of a sudden, the whole world expected me to have my children studying on Zoom and sitting still, and I needed to be a thinker. And it felt like time was just not gonna be my friend. And I feel like that most precious thing that I have, which is time, like I wasn't actually spending time with my children for a while, because even if I was physically in the room with them, my brain was somewhere else. And having to really make a conscious intention that I wasn't going to yield and give up my most precious resource when I was with them. And so it's like the gift of presence, or the stories that we allow to be told or not told, be that Black lives and being able to walk to the grocery store, being able to walk to the park, and the kind of tension that folks like those kinds of stories that have all of a sudden become into consciousness, and how do we keep those things alive, or do we feel like we need to still own the story and own the limelight? Like, what would I accept for myself? And so like really wrestling with those things. And so that kind of leads me to my final piece, which is leaning into holy envy. So my very good friend, Rabbi Sarah Bassin, speaks of this term, and I think she got it from other places too. But the idea behind holy envy is that I, as a person, can look at another person who is distinct and different than myself, has a different set of beliefs. And from their stories, I can lean in and I can grow. And so my greed becomes transformed because I become inspired, because I think, oh, like that's actually like the story about bounty was actually really transformative. And I want to be bounty. I want to be giving. I want to be generous. And so where are the places where we can actually lean into our holy envy? Rabbi Michelle Masagia spoke at our iftar last year. So iftar, oh, sorry, it is 7:27, so you don't have to put up with my cotton mouth. So she told this story at our iftar last year. So Muslims fast from sunup to sundown during the month of Ramadan. And she said, so there's a story about Rabbi Chaim, and Rabbi Chaim is merited to go and see heaven, but first he has to go to hell. And so when he goes down to hell, he sees like this table filled with food, and people's arms are in splints. So like they literally can't bend their elbows. And so though there's food and it's plenty and beautiful all in front of them, like they're all sickly and they're moaning and they're hungry and they're starving. And so he's like, interesting. Okay. And so then he zoops up to heaven and he sees also food everywhere. And also people in splints, like they can't bend their elbows and so they can't feed themselves. But where the difference and the distinction with heaven is that people are actually looking at their neighbors and seeing where their eyes are falling and seeing what their needs are, and they're actually feeding them from those dishes. And so he's like, aha, like I have it. Like I can help people down there, like that I saw, they don't have to suffer. And so like he zoops back to hell and he tells them, you know, what he saw in heaven. And he's like, all you have to do is feed your neighbor. And the person looks at him and says, are you kidding? That revolting, disgusting being, you want me to feed that? And so like I heard that story and like and the teaching from it, and I find myself softening inside and thinking like, yes, like that's exactly like the spirit of Ramadan. Like it's all about, you know, you're fasting, you're saving your money from the food that you're spending, you're paying to the poor, you are helping the community around you, and you're feeling empathy. And that's a story that doesn't come, I mean, it's not in my tradition, but I am leaning into it as something that's really inspiring to me, to help me deal with my own sense of greed. Like it doesn't have to be that like I have this beautiful food in front of me and all I need to do is take a look and see who's hungry and what they need or what it is that they need. Maybe it's different, but that I have enough awareness that it's not just about me and taking care of my own needs. And so there's all these things in our traditions that are stories that inspire us, or practices. Omid Safi in On Being in 2017 has this article where he says there's all these riches, there's all these treasures in our different traditions, and they're covered with trash. And so it's our job to actually uncover them. And there's all these beautiful things. So like, what are some of those gems that are either in your tradition or in other traditions that you lean into, that you think are an actual antidote to greed in the way that it lives in us and among us? And so like for instance, like there's fasting in all sorts of traditions. It's about cleansing. There's sadaka. There, like for instance, I heard the story of so Jenna is a Jewish philanthropist, and she tells the story about how on Shabbat her family would always have a tzedakah box, and they would always put money in there, and they would talk about where they were doing good and like something that the good that they did this last week. And then eventually when the tzedakah box got filled, she would get to decide where it went. And so this year during Ramadan, my children and I every night are putting money in our tzedakah box, which literally means the same thing, which is like to help and support people around us. And the kids get to choose where that money goes. And so, yes, the seedling lives in my tradition, but I'm also learning from another tradition. And I think it's a beautiful way to be in this world. And so I will stop there and ask us, and I'm going to ask you to consider and think about what are some of the antidotes and traditions that inspire you, that you feel are a real way to help wrestle with greed. And so I'm going to give you a moment to think while I tell a story before we go into breakout rooms. Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, you can tell I'm a fan. He's actually helped save me during COVID-19. But there's this story that he tells over a long set of pages about a lion and a hare. And in this story, the lion is like this ferocious lion, and all these animals tremble whenever they see the lion. And the lion is just terrifying and awful. And eventually all of the animals decide, you know what, we're going to come together and we're going to decide we're going to make it work, because we just can't live in terror anymore. Like, I don't know if he's going to pounce on me, and like, I just can't live like that. And so they come up with a deal with the lion, and they propose that every day they'll have one animal, and that animal will come to the lion. He'll never have to hunt. He'll always have food, and they will organize it on their own. And so the lion says all these things like because before they complained to him, they're like, we're living in terror, we can't live like this. And he's like, you know what, like, I'm a planner, I'm working hard, you're entitled, you don't necessarily like this doesn't it doesn't work that way. I'm the king, and you've got to kind of do what I say. And then they respond, and like there's this important dialogue. But as the lion is talking, you can almost feel yourself. Like, I could see myself in the lion of like, oh, like I do believe in planning. Like it's actually really important to have a layout and figure out where you're going to go. But eventually, like there's these important kind of debates that are going on, and then the lion goes for the deal, and he says, don't ever cheat me. Like, I've been cheated before, and I'm not going to go for it again. And so the animals keep their word, and every day they have like a straw, and whoever draws the short straw has to go. And so eventually they go through this several days, and then a hare draws the straw. And so it's the hare's turn, and the animals say, okay, time for you to go to the lion. And the hare says, no, I'm not going. And they push him, all this stuff. There's this really long delay. The lion's really grouchy and hungry. Finally, the hare goes, and the lion says, how dare you? Like, you tried to trick me. Like, how could you like be late, and all this like tirade. And the hare says, oh, lion, like I was so terrified. There was another lion back there, and he's big and mean, and he has my bigger, fatter cousin, who's a much healthier rabbit, and is just so meaty and so beautiful and plump. And like, I know that I was late, but I'm so sorry. The other lion said that he was bigger and better than you, and I'm just so terrified of that lion. And so the lion says, you have to show me this lion. And so the lion runs behind the hare, and they finally make it to what is a pit and water below. And then they say, and they look down, and the rabbit's like, you see, there's the big lion. He's so much bigger, and I'm so scared. And look at that fat, plump hare. And the lion also just not thinking clearly, thinking more with pride and more with greed, that he wants the plump, fat rabbit at the bottom, dives right into the pit and is no longer a problem. And so what Rumi does, I think, exceptionally well in this example is that, like, we all have characteristics of the lion and these different animals within us. And it's not always clear cut. It's not always like that, like greed is like simple, right? It's like such a huge sin. But ultimately, greed feeds ego, and a growth of greed that's just like uncontrollable and so big, like eventually literally clouds our judgment and our ability to make sound decisions. So as you're kind of, when we go into breakout groups, what I'm going to ask you to do is to take a moment to think of a story, or think of something that helps you when you are leaning into a moment of wanting more. Like I remember being at the grocery stores a year ago and everything was empty. I was like, oh my gosh, should I be buying any bean that I see? Like, and really starting to question myself there. And so it was actually leaning into the stories that I would hear from different friends and traditions that actually helped me remember that it's actually generosity that really transforms community, and that transforms me and ultimately makes me a better person. So I'm going to ask you to go into your breakout rooms. So there will be like 3 to 4 people in a breakout room. Please decide on who's well, actually, David, you had a good question. Well, hold on. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And I was going to see, Aziza, if maybe you just wanted to have the conversation between us since we're a smaller group.
Yes, I agree. So yes, upon counting, we'll just move it from there. And I mean, I'd be curious as we're kind of moving into Q&A and discussing further. NewGround style is really to draw out and to like, and to be in conversation. So kind of start us off, if you would be willing, like what are some of the traditions or sayings that have really inspired you as you counter your own need for more?
Well, I can start, and I can certainly say that if I'm ever feeling greedy, I try to dial it back and remember how much I have and what others don't have, while I have so much, and it's sort of a like a reality check in a way, and it's and then you feel really bad. Then it becomes this whole like Jewish guilt thing. It's like, oh, how could I have even gone there in the first place? But I find that can be helpful. It's a way to do that.
Yeah, there's something like, you know, there's these practices of gratitude and like of naming things that we see, and like perspective. Like there's something about seeing and learning from others, travel, that makes a big difference.
I'll go next. Mine is a little bit silly in that I have this problem with waste. And so therefore it pushes back the greed, because I don't want too much, because I'll feel like I'm wasting it. And so it kind of balances it out for me. I love, like you were mentioning before, that the feeling of giving. I get such a wonderful feeling from giving to others, that is another thing that kind of counters it for me.
Beautiful. Lois?
Lois, you're on mute. You're muted, I think.
We can't hear you.
Is this better?
Yep.
The headphones that do that. I am a collector, particularly of beads, and through that, and of textiles. And through that, I have many friends who also find tremendous pleasure in appreciating these things. And the line between when it is greed and when it is an appreciation of what exists and that you have the opportunity to enjoy these things is a very real question to me. My first thought in excusing myself is that it's a pleasure to give these things or to share them. But I would love to know your thoughts on appreciating what's available and the time that we live in and the circumstances that we have versus do you want those things or do you want your life to be simplified without a lot of extraneous things?
I think we could also with that question and like really have a good amount to think about. Like it's like in terms of the beads, like I mean, it can be hard to part with things, right? And like there's just so much like it's fascinating to me. Like I love mint and I love mint tea. And yet like when I'm sharing with my neighbors, like and they're enjoying the tea with me, like I don't know, there's just something different that's there. And sometimes but mint grows like a weed, and so I'm a little bit more protective over my apples because there's like fewer of them, but still somehow sharing like can make a difference. But I guess it depends on how rare things are, right? And but to your second part of the question, almost your third, like I've really struggled with this. Like, you know, there's something about this time that like just is really perspective giving, and like what I can actually be grateful for. And like I had a grateful, what do you call it? A gratitude practice where I'm like waking up early and thinking and the things that I'm grateful for, and I'm doing these things before I go to bed. And yet, I don't know, there was something like 6 weeks ago, I was just like really down and thinking like, man, like this is just really, really hard. And almost like feeling sorry for myself. Like this whole like mothering during COVID and like expecting kids to do things that they shouldn't really be doing anyway. Like it's just really hard. And so it's interesting. It's like, I don't know, timing wise, but like I woke up the next morning and I had this awful vertigo and I was like vomiting and I couldn't get rid of it. And it was just awful. And then like, okay, it took 6 weeks and it turns out it was my allergies, but like, there's nothing like getting sick to realizing like the wealth of health and like what you actually have. And so like, I was taking my health for granted. Like I'm going to live forever the way I live. And that's like, I know it's not true, but I was still living that way. And so you know, that's why I think it's challenging because like I want to say that like living simply is the way to go. And I actually think it is better because I'm actually more aware and I'm more present for the people that I love when I'm living more simply. And like I still have deadlines and I still have work and I still have other people who are relying on me. And it's really hard to navigate both. And sometimes, yeah, I need to simplify and other times I can't.
But what I found interesting during this time is that for months at the beginning of COVID, I didn't like want anything. Like we're in our house. I felt like we had every creature comfort here. There was, you know, it could be hard to get food at the market, but like basically it was fine. I was reading all these books that I bought years ago and were on the shelf, and I was glad to finally read them like literally 20 years after I bought it. And what I found with, and part of what people have been talking about with greed is stuff, like money and stuff. What I found is that I was really treasuring how much more time I had. Like I could wake up in the morning, and I should have probably say this in front of Tamara, who works in our office, but I didn't have to like take a shower and shave right away. And I could, you know, just put on a t-shirt and flip-flops for months and months. And it was like, I really enjoyed that. Like I was just like greedy about my time. It's like, it wasn't about stuff at all. I had felt, and also like everybody else, I wasn't spending any money because there was nothing to spend any money on. So suddenly it's like, wow, there's all this money here, but like there's nothing to buy. And then it's been an adjustment. Even in the last few weeks, it's like I got caught in a traffic jam today, and it's like I was so used to like getting where I wanted to go without sitting in traffic, and it was like I'd get there in the amount of time I expected, not 3 times longer, and I wasn't having to call people from the car saying I was going to be late. And it was just an interesting take on greed, because I think you think of it as tangible, and I found it was more, I don't know what, emotional or metaphysical or something. I don't know if anyone else has felt that way during this time, but it was definitely an interesting time to rethink some of these things.
Yeah.
Kathy, you agree? Yeah. I mean, because you talk about waste, and it's funny, I will say, when you first said you hate waste, I first thought of my own waste, not W-A-I-S-T, talking about another kind of greed that was going on, just sort of gluttony or something. But it's just wasting time. It's like how much time did I waste today being stuck on the 10 and just wanting that time? And that's especially one of those things, as you get older, you just feel like you have less time to waste. So that was sort of one of my takeaways from this past year.
Hi everybody. I'm gonna add something to the conversation. I know you can't see, but I wanted to say that in regards to greed and listening to you, David, that I feel like greed creates that sense of urgency, that things must happen now and exactly the way you want. And I think that in this time that we learn to be patient, not only with ourselves, but with others, that the time, I don't know, becomes something much, I don't know, kind of insignificant in a way, or significant, but I just really associate greed with urgency to satisfy a need, which while this, in this pandemic, that at least I think for me really shifted that concept. But I also wanted to share just one thing, Aziza, when you were talking about traditions that we rely on, and I just immediately, my grandmother came to mind. We grew up in Brazil, and in Brazil, it was it's very common. You have people who are, working in your house. You have housekeepers. You have live-in. It's very common, particularly if you are, middle class and upper middle class and so on. And I always remember there was not one time that my grandmother would bring something new to the house that she wouldn't also give something to this person who was working with us. And for me, I took that as the idea of really the importance of sharing all and giving back, no matter, how little, how big, whatever it was. I mean, whenever she brought any, I mean, it was, she had to, she would always share. So for me, it really, I think a lot about my grandparents, and with how, I mean, they were so generous in their sharing, and particularly even after, having gone through war, survived, being survivors, but there was always a way to share. Their apartment was small, very small, but people could always come in to eat, to sleep, whatever that was. So I guess my tradition is really, it's my family, and particularly my grandparents, and how they lived their lives taught me a lot.
That's beautiful. So you like learn through example and experiencing and feeling what it was like to share with somebody else. Thank you. I think Mary, you have something in the chat. Do you want to chime in, or if you want, we can read it out loud.
Okay, I can. I think that it's really interesting to hear everybody's kind of take on what we all, in some universal sense, have been sharing with family and friends and children, etc., and what the challenges have been over this last now more than a year. But some of the comments I think I've been hearing have more to do with recognizing how little we need to make us happy and more content and more able to share and give and appreciate those things with others than they have to do with greed. Greed is excess of something, and generally speaking, something that we don't need or won't benefit others, but will only benefit ourselves. So, but I think it's lovely to hear all of you talking about, like David saying, I feel the same. I don't have to get dressed in the morning. I can have a second cup of coffee. I don't have to get in my car and fight, as all of us, many of us are dealing with. I don't have to fight the morning rush hour and evening rush hour, spending less money on gas and on everything. So all of those things, I think, make us aware, help to make us aware and appreciate really how little we need in our lives to be good to ourselves and thereby good to others. It's often said that poor people tend more to share than people who have much. And I think, these are days when we're seeing that we are all so restricted, and yet there are all of these efforts to reach out to others who are in need. And I think that has to do with appreciation, not with greed.
I love what you're saying, Mary. And I hear, as I'm leaning into it, like, I think you're right. Like, and like, I see appreciation as one of the antidotes to greed. Mm-hmm. And like the awareness of seeing that maybe we don't need all that stuff that we're shipping in from other countries, or maybe, I saw articles arguing a lot for like richer countries need to be sharing the vaccine. Like we're ordering so much that's way beyond what we need. And so like we're protecting ourselves, and that's natural. And it's important to also be thinking about how the vaccine is getting to places that have less access and where it's just harder to get the vaccine. And so like there's a lot of effort to make sure that the areas in LA that are more impacted by COVID-19 have centers like where people of color, especially because we know that they're disproportionately impacted by it, like have access to the same antidotes, right? And so that appreciation for what we have and a greater awareness so that we don't try to consume more than our need. Kathy.
I was thinking that with the greed that from the pandemic was everyone going and getting all the toilet paper and things they really didn't need, or people when the vaccines became available, they would do things to, get in front of the line to get their vaccines when it wasn't their turn, because they were just taking care of themselves. I know many people that did that. And that was just what I was thinking about as far as people being greedy. It's because they wanted things for themselves, even if it, they didn't need it right then.
Aziz, I have a question for you. Is there a positive version of greed? Is there a point, do you think there's a way that something of wanting to, the idea of acquisition or something like that, is there a good version of that?
I think the best version of greed is when we wrestle with it. And just like we wrestle with all these other human attributes and qualities. And so I learn more from discussions on greed than I do just about talking about the good things in life, right? And so like it's actually wrestling through these real things. And so I mean like when there's all this, we're talking about jump starting our economy, and you know they're talking about this wave that's supposed to hit and all this like hope that's connected to it. And so yeah, I think it's a tool, and it's also a knife, like, right? It can actually be sharp. And so I think when we recognize the tool for what it is, and we're more mindful of it, we can actually just have greater control. And so I don't actually see, it's hard to say. So, but like, I think it's the way we use greed that is the most important piece. And so for the same reason why I shared that quote from the Quran, that our tests come from our children and from our wealth, and like how we use our wealth, how we use the gifts of abundance that we have, be them money, maybe they're looks, maybe they're like you're a charismatic person, you can persuade people really well, right? Like I think, and like you like to get your way. I think that all of these things are part of being human, and that greed is one of those things, and that when we are willing to really wrestle with it, it's something that can lead to a better version of ourselves.
Interesting way to think of it. It's funny because I personally feel like I like being surrounded by a lot of stuff. It's just like when I'm in a very spare room, it makes me nervous or something. It doesn't have to be nice stuff, but I think I'm trying. The reason I think I might have asked you that question is to try to make myself feel better about the fact that I don't see it as greed. I see it as I don't know whether like largesse is like the better part of greed or something, but that might be just wishful thinking or something.
Well, I mean,
a justification.
Right. It's where the rubber meets the road, and like, you know, how like our intention and like what's actually happening. Like I think about greed a lot, and so Ramadan, right? You're not supposed to eat or drink. You're supposed to give money to the poor. You're supposed to feel with people with their experiences. Does that mean that like no waste happens during Ramadan and people aren't throwing away food? Like it hurts me to have to admit this, but yeah, I was invited to like a beautiful breakfast meal every single night during Ramadan when it's not COVID-19. And like there was always an abundance of food left over. And I don't know where all the food went. But like I do know that like there's things that we can always do better. And if I'm taking anything from COVID-19, it's like, what's the story we're telling ourselves? And what are we actually going to learn from and do about it? Like, are we going to just let the story just play out the way it is? Or are we going to take hold and say, this is what I'm going to learn, and this is what I'm going to do? Like, I could make excuses for myself night and day and say, like, the tomatoes that rotted in like the freezer when the whole refrigerator broke down at least went into the compost pile. But like all that effort of like water and whatever, like they could have given somebody some vitamins that I didn't clearly need. I will say one thing, because I know we're about to wrap up. I do think experiences are essential. And sometimes when we just get into each other's spaces, like there's something that melts that our need for control. And that kind of comes to what Claudia was saying, like we're in a rush to do something and it has to be done exactly the way we want it to be done. And like what I'm taking from, like, when I try to force my children to do anything, guess what? It doesn't happen, and like there's a big problem in the house, and it always backfires. So what I've learned is that you got to let go of that control sometimes, and sometimes when you just sit back and you listen and you pay attention and you learn from each other, magical things happen. And so I'd like to invite everybody here to NewGround's annual iftar on April 27th at 8 p.m. The tickets are free because of the generosity of our sponsors. It's just going to be an hour long, and it's an opportunity to experience something a little bit different and to lean in more about some of the food and generosity, and be thinking about being in each other's spaces and melting away some of our need for control, letting go a little bit, and being part of something bigger. And I put the link in the chat. But thank you for listening and engaging tonight. This was really a gift.
Well, thank you very much, Aziza, and thank you for your generosity of your time. I know how busy you are, not just running NewGround, but with 2 kids at home. And it's funny because, like, all the things I ever asked my children to do, they always did, which is really weird. I don't know why you're having trouble.
Yeah, I'm coming over. You're going to teach me something.
So anyway, this is really wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, very much for being here. Lots of food for thought, including tomatoes and everything else. But thanks very much for this. Thank you all for being here for this and the whole series. And we're hoping to do another one starting in the fall. We're just trying to figure out what it might be. So I hope everybody stays healthy and well and gets a vaccine if you want one, or enjoying a more free life if you've already had them. So and Aziza, if you want to forward me the information about the iftar, we'll put it in our put it out to everybody so they have it there.
Wonderful. Yes, we'll do. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Thanks, Tamara, for coordinating, and it's great to see everybody again. Be well.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
And Ramadan Mubarak, Aziza. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.